The rope cut into his wrists. Gideon Pratt opened his eyes to a circle of faces he didn't recognize, all staring down at him with expressions carved from stone. His head throbbed. The last thing he remembered was watering his horse near the creek at sunset. Now the sun hung directly overhead, burning through a cloudless sky. How many hours had passed? Where was his horse? He tried to move, but his arms were bound behind his back, tied to a wooden post driven deep into the earth. Around him, the tribal camp stretched in all directions. Leather shelters standing silent as witnesses. Men and women gathered closer, forming a tightening circle. No one spoke. A young woman stood at the edge of the crowd, her dark eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his chest tighten. She knew something. He could see in the way she held herself, rigid and alert, as if waiting for a specific moment to arrive. But why? Wasn't she speaking? 3 days earlier, Gideon had ridden into the valley carrying nothing but supplies and honest intentions. He'd come to deliver goods, flour, and salt, and tools to a trading post that served both settlers and the native families who lived in the surrounding hills. The work was simple. The pay was fair. He kept to himself, spoke when spoken to, and never looked for trouble. But trouble had a way of finding men like him, men who moved through the world without armor or allies. The camp had been quiet when he'd arrived at the creek. He remembered dismounting, letting his horse drink from the cold water. Then a sound behind him, something heavy swinging through the air. Pain had exploded across the back of his skull, and the world had collapsed into darkness. Now he was here, accused of something he didn't understand, facing judgment from people who had already decided his guilt. A man stepped forward from the crowd, older with gray streaks running through long hair that fell past his shoulders. Scars marked his face, thin, white lines that spoke of survival and conflict. This was Takakota, the chief. His presence commanded silence. Even in a place already devoid of sound, he carried himself with the authority of someone who had led his people through seasons of hardship and loss. Takakota's gaze moved across Gideon's face, measuring, evaluating. Then he turned and gestured toward the crowd. Another, man emerged, this one wearing clothes that didn't belong in this place. A pressed shirt, polished boots, a coat. Far too clean for the dust and heat. Royce Barrett. Gideon's stomach dropped. He knew that face. He'd seen it 3 days ago at the trading post. Smiling too wide, laughing too loud, making promises to people who didn't realize they were being lied to. Royce walked to the center of the circle, positioning himself directly across from Gideon. He met Gideon's eyes for just a moment, and in that brief glance, Gideon understood everything. This wasn't an accident. This was a trap, and he'd walked straight into it. Takakota raised his hand. The judgment was about to begin. Takakota's voice cut through the silence like a blade through cloth. He spoke in his own language first, words Gideon couldn't understand, but whose weight he felt in every syllable. Then the chief switched to rough English. Each word, deliberate and heavy with accusation. 3 sacred rifles taken from our storage. Rifles given by treaty. Protection for our families. Takakota's eyes burned into Gideon. You were seen near our camp. You were seen leaving before sunrise. Now the rifles are gone. Gideon's throat went dry. Sacred rifles. Treaty weapons meant to protect the tribe from threats, from wild animals, from hostile groups that roamed the territory. Stealing those wasn't just theft. It was a declaration of war, a betrayal of the fragile peace that kept this valley from drowning in conflict. I didn't take anything, Gideon said, his voice rougher than he intended. I came here to deliver supplies, that's all. I watered my horse at the creek, and someone attacked me from behind. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Gideon saw doubt in some faces, anger in others, but most just watched, waiting to see how this would unfold. The young woman, the one who'd been staring at him with such intensity, remained motionless. At the edge of the gathering, her jaw was set, her hands clenched at her sides. She wanted to speak. He could see, in the tension that held her body rigid, but she stayed silent. Takakota raised his hand again, and the murmurs died. He gestured toward Royce Barrett, who stepped forward with practiced confidence. Royce looked at the assembled tribe with what appeared to be sincere concern, his expression carefully arranged into something resembling regret. "Chief Dakota, I wish I didn't have to say this." Royce's voice carried false sympathy, but I saw him. 2 mornings ago, just before dawn, I was checking my wagon near the trading post when I noticed someone moving through the brush toward your camp. I didn't think much of it at first. Figured maybe he had business with your people, but then I saw him again coming. Back the same way, carrying something wrapped in canvas, something long, the shape of rifles. Lies. Every word was a calculated lie, delivered with the smooth confidence of a man who'd built a career on deception. Gideon's hands formed fists behind his back, the rope cutting deeper into his wrists as he strained against the bindings. "That's not true," Gideon said louder now. "I never went near their storage. I never touched those rifles." "He's lying." But Royce was already reaching into his coat, pulling out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to Takakota with theatrical solemnity. "I found this near where the rifles were kept, a receipt from the trading post, with his name on it." Takakota unfolded the paper, his eyes scanning the writing. Gideon's heart sank. He'd signed receipts at the trading post when he'd picked up the delivery contract. Standard procedure, nothing unusual. But now that signature was being twisted into evidence of guilt, proof that he'd been in the area, that he'd had access and opportunity. The chief's expression darkened. He looked at Gideon with something close to certainty now, the kind of certainty that ended with punishment, swift and permanent. The crowd shifted closer, their earlier doubt hardening into conviction. Gideon felt the air grow thicker, heavier, pressing down on his chest like a physical weight. And still the young woman said nothing but her eyes never left Royce's face. Royce wasn't finished. He turned to address the crowd directly now, his voice rising with manufactured outrage. "I've tried to be fair. I've tried to give settlers and native families a chance to trade peacefully, to build something better than what came before. But there are men, like this one, who see opportunity in chaos. Men who want to profit from conflict." The irony nearly choked Gideon. Those words described Royce perfectly, not him. But the crowd didn't know that. They only knew what they'd been told, what they'd been shown. Gideon forced himself to speak, to cut through Royce's performance. "Ask anyone at the trading post. I delivered flour and salt, nothing more. I stayed one night, slept in the barn, and rode out the next morning. I never came near your camp until someone knocked me unconscious and dragged me here." One of the tribal elders, a woman with silver hair braided down her back, stepped forward. She spoke to Takakota in their language, her tone questioning. Takakota listened, then nodded slowly. He turned back to Gideon. "You say you were attacked. Where? When?" "At the creek yesterday evening. The sun was low, maybe an hour before dark. I was alone. My horse was drinking when something hit me from behind." Takakota exchanged glances with several men in the crowd. 2 of them broke away, moving quickly toward the edge of the camp. Gideon understood. They were going to check the creek, look for signs of a struggle, for evidence that might support his story. Hope flickered in his chest. Fragile but real. If they found proof, if they saw disturbed earth or blood, or anything that confirmed his version of events, maybe this could still end without violence. But Royce was already shaking his head, his expression shifting to something like pity. Of course, he'd say that. Any guilty man would claim innocence. Any thief would invent a story about being attacked. He paused, letting his words settle, but "I'm not here to argue about what he says. I'm here to tell you what I saw. And I saw him near your storage building. I saw him carrying those rifles away." The men returned from the creek faster than Gideon expected. 2. Fast. They spoke to Takakota in low voices, and the chief's face remained unreadable. Then Takakota looked at Gideon again, and this time there was something final in his expression. "The ground near the creek shows nothing. No signs of struggle, no blood, no proof of what you claim. Gideon's hope shattered. Of course, there were no signs. Whoever had attacked him had been careful professional. They'd covered their tracks, smoothed the earth, removed any evidence that might contradict the narrative Royce had built. And now that narrative was all anyone could see. Then check his wagon, Gideon said desperately, nodding toward Royce. If he's so honest, if he's so concerned about peace, let the tribe search his belongings. See what he's really doing here. Royce's smile didn't waver. Search it. I have nothing to hide. Takakota considered this, then gestured to two younger men. They moved toward Royce's wagon, which stood at the edge of the camp near the horses. Royce watched them go with perfect calm, his hands relaxed at his sides. He wasn't worried. That's what terrified Gideon most. Royce wasn't worried because he'd already planned for this. Whatever they found in that wagon, it wouldn't help Gideon's case. It would only make things worse. The young woman finally moved. She took 3 steps forward, breaking from the crowd, her eyes locked onto her father's face. Takakota noticed her. Immediately, his expression softening for just a moment before hardening again. He raised a hand, a silent command for her to stop. She did, but her body remained taut with barely contained urgency. The men returned from Royce's wagon carrying something wrapped in oilcloth. They brought it to Takakota and carefully unfolded the fabric. Inside lay 3 rifles, sacred rifles, the ones that had been stolen from the tribe's storage. The crowd erupted in angry shouts. Takakota held up both hands, demanding silence. When he spoke, his voice carried across the camp like thunder before a storm. The evidence is clear. The rifles are found in the wagon of this man. He pointed at Royce, but his eyes remained on Gideon, hidden there by the one who stole them. Gideon's world tilted. Royce had planted the rifles in his own wagon, knowing the tribe would search it, knowing they'd find them and assume Gideon had hidden them there. It was perfect, cruel and perfect, and there was nothing Gideon could say that would change what everyone now believed to be true. Takakota raised his hand, and the shouting ceased instantly. The silence that followed felt like the moment before lightning strikes, electric and dangerous. The chief's face had transformed from measured judgment to cold certainty. He spoke first in his own language, addressing the tribe. Then he turned to Gideon, and his words came in English heavy with finality. You came to our land. You took what protects our children. You try to hide your crime by putting the rifles in another man's wagon, hoping we would not search, hoping we would blame him instead. Takakota's voice grew harder with each sentence. This is not just theft. This is betrayal of the peace we have fought to keep. Gideon pulled against the ropes, ignoring the pain as they cut into his skin. I didn't hide those rifles. Royce put them there himself. He's the one who stole them. He's setting me up, so you'll blame me instead of looking at what he's really doing here. But his words sounded desperate even to his own ears. He had no proof, no witnesses, nothing but his own insistence. And that meant nothing against the physical evidence everyone had just seen. Royce stood near Takakota, his expression carefully arranged into righteous anger mixed with disappointment, as if he'd hoped better from Gideon, but wasn't surprised by this outcome. Chief Takakota, Royce said, his voice smooth and reasonable. I understand your anger. These rifles represent your security, your ability to protect your families. Their theft is a serious crime. He paused, looking at Gideon, with what appeared to be genuine sadness. But I would ask that you consider mercy. Perhaps this man made a mistake. Perhaps he was desperate, needed money. Killing him won't bring understanding between our peoples. The suggestion of mercy made Gideon's blood run cold because he understood immediately what Royce was doing. By asking for leniency, Royce appeared noble and compassionate while simultaneously reinforcing Gideon's guilt. Every word out of Royce's mouth pushed the tribe further toward conviction while making Royce look like a voice of reason and peace. Takakota studied Royce for a long moment, then looked back at Gideon. He speaks for you. Ask that your life be spared." The chief's eyes held no warmth. "But our law is clear. Stealing weapons meant to protect our families is an act of war. And acts of war demand consequences." The crowd pressed closer. Gideon saw hands, moving to knives to clubs, saw faces twisted with rage and fear. These people had been promised protection through that treaty, had been given those rifles as assurance that they could defend themselves. Now someone had stolen that security and they wanted justice. They deserved justice, but they were about to punish the wrong man. "Please," Gideon said, hating the desperation in his voice, but unable to stop it. "Just give me a chance to prove what I'm saying. Let me show you what Royce is really planning." "You've had your chance," Takakota said. "The evidence speaks louder than your words." The chief turned to the gathered tribe and began speaking in their language again. Gideon didn't need a translation to understand what was being said. He could see it in the way people nodded, in the way they looked at him with expressions that had moved beyond anger into something colder and more permanent. Takakota was pronouncing sentence. Royce caught Gideon's eye for just a moment, and this time he didn't bother hiding the satisfaction in his face. He'd won. He'd manipulated everything perfectly, turned an entire tribe against an innocent man while positioning himself as their ally and advocate. Whatever Royce was planning, whatever scheme required these people to lose faith in settlers, to believe themselves betrayed, it was working. Takakota finished speaking and turned back to Gideon. The chief's hand moved to the knife at his belt, not to draw it. Not yet, but the gesture was clear. The judgment had been made. The sentence would be carried out. And that's when the young woman stepped forward again. This time, when Takakota raised his hand to stop her, she ignored him. She walked straight into the center of the circle, positioning herself between her father and Gideon. When she spoke, her voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. "Father, stop." Every eye turned to her. Takakota's expression shifted to surprise, then warning. "Nala, return to your place. This does not concern you." But Nala didn't move. She stood, perfectly still, her back straight, her eyes fixed on one person in the crowd. Not Gideon, not her father. Royce Barrett. Nala's eyes remained locked on Royce. The crowd shifted uneasily, confused by her defiance, uncertain what she meant to accomplish. Takakota took a step toward his daughter, his voice low and firm. "Nala," I said, "return to your place. The judgment has been made." She finally looked at her father, and in that moment, Gideon saw something in her face that made his chest tighten. Fear, not for herself, but for what her words might cost her, for how speaking the truth might change everything. But beneath that fear lay something stronger. Determination, the kind that couldn't be silenced or pushed aside. "The judgment is wrong," she said. Her voice carried across the camp, clear and unwavering. "This man did not steal our rifles." The crowd erupted in angry murmurs. Takakota's face darkened. "You were not there. You did not see what happened." "But I did see." Nala turned to face Royce fully now. 2 mornings ago, before sunrise, I was returning from hunting in the Eastern Hills. I saw someone moving near our storage building. I thought it was one of our own people at first, so I stayed quiet. Didn't want to disturb them. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was harder. "But it wasn't one of us." Royce's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. He remained calm, but Gideon could see tension creeping into his shoulders, into the set of his jaw. Nala was about to destroy everything he'd built, and he knew it. I watched, Nala continued. I stayed hidden because something felt wrong the way he moved. Too careful, too deliberate. He opened the storage building, took the 3 rifles, wrapped them in canvas, and carried them away toward the settlement. She took a breath. Then I saw him hide them near the creek in the brush where the willows grow thick. He spent a long time covering his tracks, making sure no one would see what he'd done. The crowd had gone completely silent now. Every person stood frozen, processing what they were hearing. Takakota stared at his daughter with an expression caught between disbelief and dawning understanding. If you saw this, Takakoda said slowly. Why did he not speak before now? Because I wasn't certain at first. The light was dim. I could see what he was doing, but not his face clearly. Not until he came back here this morning, standing in front of everyone, lying about what happened. Nala's voice grew, stronger than I knew for certain, and I will not let an innocent man die for a crime he didn't commit. Royce finally moved. He spread his hands in a gesture of confusion and hurt. Chief Takakoda, I don't know what your daughter thinks she saw, but I assure you. Nala turned on him, cutting him off mid-sentence. She walked toward him slowly, each step measured and deliberate, until she stood directly in front of him. Close enough that he couldn't look away. Close enough that everyone could see both their faces clearly. When she spoke, her words fell into the silence like stones into still water. For words, simple, devastating, absolute. I saw you do it. The weight of those words crashed down on the gathering. 4-3 full heartbeats, no. One moved. No one breathed. Then Royce's carefully constructed mask cracked. Just for an instant, just long enough for Gideon to see the calculation in his eyes, the rapid assessment of how to recover from this, how to twist it back in his favor. But before Royce could speak, before he could craft another lie, Takakoda stepped forward. The chief's hand shot out and gripped Royce's arm, not gently. His voice, when it came, carried a rage that had been building since the moment those rifles went missing. You accuse my daughter of lying. Royce's smile returned, but it was thinner now, more desperate. Chief, please. She's mistaken. The light was poor. She said so herself. She couldn't have seen. She saw enough. Takakoda's grip tightened. And now you will explain why you stole from us, why you tried to blame another man, and why you thought you could stand in my camp and lie to my face. Two tribal warriors moved forward, flanking Royce on either side. His smile vanished completely. For the first time since this nightmare began, Gideon saw genuine fear in Royce Barrett's eyes. The carefully planned trap was collapsing, and the man who built it was about to be caught inside. Royce tried to pull away from Takakoda's grip, but the chief held firm. The two warriors moved closer, their hands resting on their weapons, their expressions leaving no room for escape. Royce's eyes darted around the circle, searching for an opening, a way out, but the crowd had closed in tight. There was nowhere to run. This is ridiculous, Royce said, his voice rising with false indignation. Your daughter is confused. She's trying to protect someone. Maybe she has feelings for this cowboy. I don't know, but you can't seriously believe. Search his wagon, Takakoda commanded. Everything, every corner, every hidden space. For men moved immediately toward Royce's wagon. They worked with methodical precision, pulling away false bottoms, checking beneath seats, opening every container and bag. Royce's face went pale as they worked, his earlier confidence bleeding away with each passing moment. Gideon watched from where he remained tied to the post, his heart pounding against his ribs. The search didn't take long. One of the men called out, holding up a leather satchel he'd found hidden beneath a loose board in the wagon bed. He brought it to Takakoda and opened it carefully. Inside lay papers, dozens of them covered in writing and official-looking stamps. Takakoda pulled out the first document and began reading, his expression growing darker with each line. What is this? Takakoda demanded, holding the paper up for Royce to see. Royce said nothing. His jaw was clenched, tight, his hands balled into fists at his sides. Gideon couldn't see the document from where he was tied, but he could see the effect it had on Takakoda. The chief's face had transformed from anger into something colder, more dangerous. Betrayal. Takakoda handed the document to the elder woman with silver braided hair. She read it, her eyes widening, then passed it to another elder. As more people read the papers, a wave of shock and rage spread through the crowd. Finally, Takakoda turned to address everyone, his voice shaking with barely controlled fury. These papers are land contracts, agreements to sell this territory to mining companies and settlers from the east. Contracts that claim I have already agreed to move my people from this valley. He turned back to Roy. Contracts with my mark on them. My signature. Except I never signed these documents. I never agreed to leave our land. The pieces fell into place in Gideon's mind with brutal clarity. Royce hadn't just stolen the rifles. He'd forged agreements to force the tribe off their land, and by framing Gideon for the theft by making the tribe believe a settler had betrayed them. Royce was creating the conflict he needed. If the tribe retaliated against settlers, if violence broke out, the territorial authorities would have justification to remove the tribe by force. The land would be cleared, the contracts would be honored, and Royce would collect his payment from the companies waiting to exploit the valley's resources. You planned all of this, Gideon said, his voice carrying across the camp. You stole the rifles to make them think I betrayed them. You wanted them angry enough to attack settlers. Then the authorities would come, clear them out, and your buyers would get the land. Royce's silence was confirmation enough. Takakota stepped closer to him, his hand now on the knife at his belt. When he spoke, his words came through clenched teeth. You would have us kill an innocent man. You would start a war between our people and the settlers. You would drive us from land that has been ours for generations. The chief's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. All for money. It's just business, Roy said, his mask finally dropping completely. No more pretense of friendship or concern, just cold calculation. This land is worth more to companies than it is to you. You're wasting it, living like you're still in some past. That doesn't exist anymore. I was offering progress, opportunity. You were offering lies. Takakota's hand tightened on his knife. And now you will face justice, real justice. The warriors grabbed Royce's arms, forcing him to his knees in the center of the circle. The crowd pressed closer, their anger palpable, their voices rising in demands for punishment. Gideon watched it all unfold, relief washing over him in waves so powerful his legs nearly gave out. Beneath him, the truth was finally visible. The trap had collapsed on the man who'd built it. But even as relief flooded through him, Gideon saw something that made his blood run cold. Royce was smiling. Not the false smile from before, but something genuine. Something that suggested he still had one card left to play. Royce lifted his head, that terrible smile still fixed on his face. When he spoke, his voice carried across the silent crowd with absolute confidence. You think this ends with me? You think I worked alone? He laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. Those contracts have already been delivered. Copies are sitting in territorial offices right now, waiting to be processed. Even if you kill me, even if you burn every paper in that wagon, the wheels are already turning. In 3 weeks, maybe 4, officials will arrive to enforce those agreements. The crowd erupted in angry shouts. Takakota raised his hand for silence, but the fear in people's faces was unmistakable. If Royce was telling the truth, if copies of those forged documents were already in official hands, then killing him would accomplish nothing. The tribe would still lose their land. The war Royce wanted would still happen. But Gideon had spent enough time around men like Royce to recognize a bluff when he heard one. He'd seen in trading posts and saloons, watched desperate men make bold claims they couldn't back up, hoping fear alone would save them. And right now, Royce was desperate. He's lying, Gideon said. Every head turned toward him. If he'd already delivered those documents, he wouldn't still have the originals in his wagon. He'd have kept copies for himself, not the real contracts with forged signatures. Those papers are too valuable, too dangerous. He couldn't risk anyone else seeing them before the deal was complete. Royce's smile faltered just for a moment, but it was enough. Gideon pressed forward, and he couldn't have partners. A scheme like this, forging tribal agreements, stealing sacred weapons, framing an inosangman, that requires secrecy. The more people involved, the more chances. Someone talks, someone gets caught, someone demands a bigger cut. He worked alone because he had to, because no one else could know what he was really doing. Takakota studied Royce's face, reading the truth in the way his expression had shifted from confidence to barely concealed panic. The chief nodded slowly, cut the cowboy loose. One of the warriors moved to Gideon, drawing a knife and sawing through the ropes binding his wrists. The relief, when the pressure released, was almost painful. Gideon's arms fell to his sides, blood rushing back into his hands. In a burning flood, he pushed himself to his feet, stumbling slightly, then steadied himself and walked toward where Royce knelt in the center of the circle. "You try to have me killed for a crime I didn't commit," Gideon said, looking down at the man who'd nearly destroyed him. "You were willing to start a war, to get innocent people killed, just to make money off stolen land." Royce glared up at him, his mask completely gone now. What remained was something ugly and small. "You're nobody. You think this matters? You think stopping me changes anything? There are 100 men like me out here, all looking for the same opportunities. Someone else will come, someone smarter, and these people will lose their land anyway. Maybe," Gideon said quietly, "but not today and not because of you." Dakota stepped forward, positioning himself beside Gideon. The chief looked at his daughter, who had remained standing near her father throughout the revelation. Pride showed clearly in his face, mixed with something deeper. Gratitude. She had risked speaking against him, had challenged his judgment in front of the entire tribe because she knew the truth mattered more than obedience. Nala Dakota said, "Your courage saved a life today. Your words stopped an injustice." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "You honored our people and our law." Nala met her father's eyes, then looked at Gideon. Something passed between them, an understanding that needed no words. She had seen him at the creek, had watched Royce attack him from behind, drag his unconscious body into the brush. She could have spoken immediately, could have prevented all of this, but she'd needed to be certain, needed to see Royce's face in clear light, needed to hear his lies before she could be absolutely sure. And when the moment came, when an innocent man's life hung in the balance, she had spoken those for words that changed everything. Takakota turned back to Royce. "Our law is clear. You stole from us. You tried to destroy us, and now you will answer for those crimes." The warriors pulled Royce to his feet. He struggled, shouting threats and curses, but his words meant nothing now. The crowd parted as they led him away toward the edge of the camp. Gideon watched him go, feeling something heavy lift from his chest. Justice. Real justice. Not the false version Royce had tried to construct, but the kind that came from truth being heard and acted upon. Takakota looked at Gideon for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. Gideon took it. The sun began its descent toward the western hills, painting the valley in shades of amber and rust. Gideon stood at the edge of the tribal camp, watching as men worked to gather Royce's belongings. Every forged contract, every piece of evidence, every document that proved the scope of his conspiracy was being collected. Takakota had already sent 2 riders to the nearest territorial office with a real story carrying proof of the forgery and a formal complaint against Royce Barrett for attempted fraud and theft. Royce himself sat bound near the center of camp, guarded by 4 warriors. His earlier confidence had vanished completely. The tribal council had deliberated for less than an hour before reaching their decision. Royce would be held until territorial authorities arrived to collect him. He would face trial in a proper court, answer for his crimes under the law he tried to manipulate. It wasn't the swift justice someone in the tribe had wanted, but Dakota had been clear in his reasoning. If they killed Royce, his death could be twisted into proof that the tribe was dangerous, unpredictable, violent. Better to let the authorities see exactly what kind of man they were dealing with. Let the evidence speak for itself. Gideon's horse had been found grazing near the creek, still saddled, untouched by whoever had attacked him. One of the younger warriors had brought the animal back to camp along with Gideon's belongings. Everything was there. Nothing stolen, nothing damaged. He checked the saddlebags out of habit, finding the payment for his delivery. Work still secure in its leather pouch. 3 days ago, that money had seemed important. Now it felt insignificant, compared to what he'd almost lost. Nala approached from the direction of her father's dwelling. She carried something, wrapped in cloth, which she extended toward Gideon as she stopped a few paces away. He took it carefully, unfolding the fabric to reveal dried meat and flatbread. Enough provisions for several days of travel. For your journey, she said. Her voice was quieter than it had been during the judgment, but no less certain. Thank you. Gideon rewrapped the food and secured it to his saddle. For this, and for speaking when you did. I should have spoken sooner before. It went so far. You spoke when you were certain. That takes courage. He looked at her directly. Those 4 words saved my life. A slight smile touched the corner of her mouth. They were the only words that mattered. Takakota emerged from his dwelling and walked toward them. The chief's expression had softened since the judgment ended, some of the hardness leaving his features. He stopped beside his daughter, placing a hand on her shoulder before addressing Gideon. You're free to go. No debt remains between us. Dakota paused, choosing his next words carefully. What happened here? The lies, the false accusations. They came from one man's greed, not from all settlers. My people will remember that distinction. I'll remember that your daughter's courage prevented an injustice, Gideon replied. And that when the truth came forward, you listened. Takakota nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement and respect. Then he stepped back, giving Gideon space to mount his horse. The animal shifted. Beneath him, eager to move after standing idle for so long. Gideon gathered the res, then looked down at Nala. One last time, if you're ever near the trading post, ask for me. I owe you more than provisions and gratitude. The debt is paid, she said, but something in her eyes suggested she might take him up on that offer someday. Gideon turned his horse toward the valley entrance. As he rode away from the camp, he glanced back once. The tribe had already returned to their daily routines. The crisis passed, the threat removed. Takakota stood with his arm around Nala's shoulders, watching Gideon depart. Neither raised a hand in farewell, but they didn't need to. What had been said between them was enough. The valley road stretched ahead, familiar and safe now. Gideon touched his heels to the horse's sides, urging it into a steady trot. Behind him, the tribal camp grew smaller with distance. Ahead lay the trading post, another delivery contract, another stretch of ordinary days. He was nobody special, just a man who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time, who'd nearly died for a crime he didn't commit, and who'd been saved by 4 words spoken at exactly the right moment. The sun touched the horizon as he cleared the valley. Gideon didn't look back again. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the frontier where honor and truth face their greatest tests. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.